Now, as we promised at 6 tonight, we've got more on the reaction to the passing of West Virginia native and NBA basketball legends Jerry West.
We certainly do. Sports director Josh Widman traveled into the Commonwealth today to talk with a Bluefield native who is an internationally renowned sports biographer who's written about a number of big stars over the years, including Jerry West. And we're joined now by Josh Widman. And Josh.
Yeah, well, so Josh, you spoke with one of Jerry West's biographers. Can you tell us a little what you learned today?
Yeah, I got to spend over an hour with Roland Lazenby, who, like Martin said, has written about a number of legendary sports figures, of course, including Jerry West. My biggest takeaway was his knowledge and insight. It was really impressive. He's truly an expert at what he reports on and the people that he reports on. Jerry West is absolutely one of those stars. Lazenby didn't hold anything back while talking about Jerry West and his impact both on and off the court. Keep in mind, Lazenby has been interviewing Jerry West for decades.
He was the logo because he was the competitive standard. He was recognized as that guy who cared on a deeper level.
Roland Lazenby has written books about some of the greatest players in NBA history, and that list includes Jerry West. Lazenby was born in Bluefield, West Virginia, and he traveled to see West play in the NCAA tournament in Charlotte. He offers a glimpse of what West meant to the people in the Mountain State.
It's hard to describe, you know. There are things you remember from childhood, but that one just leaps out like a neon sign in my memory. Oh, we're here to see Jerry West. I wasn't old enough to decipher a whole lot of the action, but that was imprinted on my brain, in my soul in a lot of ways.
West brought joy to fans like Lazenby and his father across West Virginia, and he was proud to represent his home state on the court with the Mountaineers.
You couldn't tell the day he signed when he and his mother were sitting there frowning, but it meant everything. It meant everything, and it would mean everything to him going forward.
West was a complicated man who put together a highly decorated 14-year career in the NBA. Lazenby explains how he thinks West will be remembered.
That competitive standard, caring on a deeper level, as a great emotional figure in all of basketball. Friends to players everywhere, not the kind of guy that's going to sweet talk them, but he is their friend. It's known from day one, as Magic Johnson explained, that Jerry West is on your side. That doesn't mean he's not going to say some hard things, because Jerry's going to say what he thinks.
West finally reached the top of the NBA mountain in 1972. The celebration and his attitude weren't what you may expect after everything West went through to get there.
All of those finals, all those losing efforts, he was the guy. He was scoring, he was doing these things, and he said, you know, when we won it, I didn't play very well. I was a nervous wreck by then, and I was just another piece of the machinery. And he wanted to be that guy. He lived to be that guy.
Lazenby has interviewed other Lakers greats like Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, and Magic Johnson, to name a few. West was honored before Game 3 of the NBA Finals.
Please join us in observing a moment of silence in honor of a true legend, Jerry West.
He is one of the iconic figures in that franchise and obviously all of basketball. The Lakers are one of the most prestigious franchises in all of professional sports. Where do you think he stacks up among all of the greats that have played for that team?
I will tell you that if you're having a conversation about the greatest Laker, Jerry West is smack dab in the middle of that conversation with some very special people. Jerry advanced the cause of that franchise like few others.